Welcome to the Radical CEO, Transformation Stories from the C-Suite, with your host, Libby Gill. Libby started her career in Hollywood, where she led communications at media giants Sony, Universal, and Turner Broadcasting. Now, as a human engineering expert, she leads leadership, coaching, and consulting firm Libby Gill & Company, where she guides Fortune 500 clients to lead through change, challenge, and chaos. An international speaker and award-winning author, Libby's mission with this videocast is to bring you intimate conversations with business and thought leaders who've transformed careers and companies with their radical ideas and bold actions.
Hello, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. We've got a really special guest, Dr. Odom, who is the CEO and Chief Clinical Officer of Simple Recovery and Shift Wellness. He's had a really distinguished healthcare career for more than 30 years as a C-suite executive, a business owner, a consultant, a speaker, and a therapist. And he's a real pioneer in behavioral health, addiction treatment, and wellness, which is really close to my heart because I've shared a lot with you all about my family's struggles with mental illness. And I'm also on the board of the D.D. Hirsch Mental Health Services here in LA. It serves communities in and around Los Angeles, and also founded the nation's first suicide prevention center. Now, Dr. Odom lives by, I love this, the far too rare guiding principle that people can do and can stay well. They can get well, they can stay well, which is really a very hopeful message for anybody that struggles with mental health or has a family member or friend who does. And a big part of his current work is with first responders, firefighters, police officers, and their families. And he's developed and works with some really interesting healing practices to deal with, you can imagine, the PTSD and anxiety. And he's going to share some of that with us. And believe me, if Dr. Odom can help first responders with coping skills and resiliency, there's a lot we can all learn from him. So welcome. Thank you for being here, Dr. Odom.
Thank you, Libby. It's really nice to be here.
Great. Well, you've got such a vast, you've also, your academic studies, your clinical expertise. Where did you start this journey of behavioral and mental health?
You know, interestingly enough, I didn't even realize it at the time, but when I was about 8 years old, my father had come back from Vietnam. He was an Army physician. He was one of those guys who got drafted at the age of 33. They did that with physicians. And when he came back, he saw that there was a lot of young men who were addicted to drugs, so that he was going to help open up a drug-free clinic. And a man came and stayed at our home for about a month and taught my dad how to do heroin detox. The man's name was David Smith, and Dr. David Smith was the founder of the Haight-Ashbury clinics.
Wow.
And so little did I know, but I think it was kind of already in the blood. And so, you know, by the time I got my education going, I was given opportunities to do internships with addiction treatment and behavioral health. And it just kind of rolled into a career from which I've never looked back.
You you grew up in the business, it sounds like. You started early. My dad was a Navy psychiatrist. So I have memories of, stopping at the VA centers, and the strangest of all, and this will totally date me, but we lived on a base in Japan, and watching the movie MASH, if you remember that, all about combat, Korean War, in the hospital mental health unit with a bunch of soldiers on gurneys and wheelchairs who were in the hospital watching the movie MASH. It was absolutely surreal. So you early on decided that was going to be your career path. And then how did you start out? What did you do in terms of that career progression?
Well, I pursued credentials, I pursued licensure, I pursued graduate school. But along the way, I was given opportunities to work in treatment centers. Mm-hmm. In a lot of ways, I worked my way up because I worked while I went to college. And so I was a treatment aide, and I was a counselor assistant, and I was a counselor. And I always felt like that was really valuable looking back. I think I was a little envious of all the kids that went straight through school. But when I look back again, I was allowed to be much more in the milieu or around patients than just being the doctor.
don't you feel like that gave you, it must have given you a business perspective as well, because you were seeing these clinical settings from all different levels and perspectives.
That's exactly right. So, not only was I working with people to help them with their psychological or their chemical dependency problems, but I was also having to meet a budget. And so that's an interesting mix, especially when, most of the places I worked ultimately were not for profit, large hospital organizations, but you still had to meet your numbers. And so how do you deliver quality clinical care within a budget and still have a mission of delivering, the best to everyone? So that's always been a bit of a challenge. And I took it as an opportunity to figure out how to do things the right way, a smarter way, all those kinds of things. I also grew up in the world of locked psychiatric units back when ECE was popular again. Chemical dependency, I've been through, ever since the 80s, kind of what that's looked like. And in a lot of ways, where we are today with chemical dependency is better than we've ever been. At the same time, we have this opioid epidemic
Right.
that in many ways was of our own making, but that's maybe the subject for a whole nother talk.
Yeah.
And what's always been infused in everything I've ever done is the whole concept of looking at the whole person, and not just the psychiatric problem or not just the chemical dependency, but how does that person balance their whole life out? And usually what you see with psychiatric and chemical dependency problems is there's not much balance. It's completely focused in one or two areas, and yet that's not really the best way to live. And so the whole concept of wellness isn't new, but it's really about looking at the categories of relational or emotional or relationship or nutritional or psychiatric, all those things was always really intriguing to me.
Mm-hmm.
Back in, I think it was like 1989 or 90, I got to go train under a fellow named John Kabat-Zinn, who's kind of the father of mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned mindfulness stress management, because that's what we first started talking about. And it kind of permeated the workplace. And I brought it from a healthcare perspective, because that was the people that I worked with.
Mm-hmm.
Nurses, physicians, and everyone else in a hospital, were very high stress, very high acuity patients. Everyone's given their all to keep people alive or to bring them back from the brink.
Yeah.
And I started seeing trauma there, that you get exposed to really unfortunate events, and yet we just say, oh, that's just part of the job.
So you're not just talking about the stress and the anxiety among patients, but among the staff itself.
Precisely. Yeah, that's really where I began to focus. It's the concept of healing the healer. In a lot of ways, we come into this world of healthcare, and then we'll move on into public safety in a little bit, but we have a mission, and our mission is to relieve suffering, and it's to be there to help other people. And we almost always forget about ourselves. We will take care of everybody else first. In some ways, it's what we call healthcare codependency.
Yeah.
We're so good at everybody else, but then when we go home, we either don't take care of ourselves, or we start kind of doing other things to self-medicate the exhaustion, the stress, the anxiety, the depression, all the things that happen to us too, because we're in a world where people are not at their best. We
Right.
see people at their worst, but what do we do for ourselves when it's all over? So that's kind of where it comes from.
Well, and that guiding principle that I saw in your bio and on your website, that's so interesting to me, that people can get well, they do get well, and they can stay well. That's not something you hear that often. I mean, particularly with the really acute cases. There's like my schizophrenic brother. Nobody's ever said, and there are some things we probably can't get well.
True.
So,
I mean, I think as a guiding principle, it's exactly that, a principle.
yeah.
It doesn't mean that it's true for everyone in every situation.
Right. And I wasn't suggesting that.
But I would even say that potentially your schizophrenic brother can get to a state of managing his illness,
Yeah.
so that he can be productive and do all the things that he needs to do to live the best life he can.
Exactly.
And there's a lot that goes into schizophrenia about, the fact that most of it's paranoid. And so therefore we're afraid that people are trying to do something to us. And so we don't
Seek help. Yeah.
By and large, I think the idea is we are not our illnesses. We are humans, and we have illnesses, and we have injuries. And what should we do to heal the injuries or manage the illness,
Mm-hmm.
and not just be that diagnosis? And so
Yeah.
I think that's real important.
Yeah. And by the way, he is retired, but he was a college professor for many years teaching English.
Exactly.
So
That's
yeah,
cool.
not easy, but
But
yeah,
he was living his best life.
he absolutely was.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's good.
So tell me, where are you today? What's your primary focus? Because
What
you've got
day is it?
businesses, you've got all kinds of things. And how did you learn the leadership and the business skills that you bring, which is not necessarily part of a clinician's role?
Right. I think a lot of this, if I have skills and if I have expertise, it came through lots of mistake.
Right. Well, most of us.
You know, I think that in a lot of ways, my background as a therapist and as, you know, my bachelor's degree was in organizational behavior. So I kind of started off looking at organizations. One of my first jobs was as an employee assistance program director,
Right.
part of a psychiatric system. But I went out and did the EAP work and led outpatient services for big companies like M&M Mars and
Wow.
Duracell and U.S. Forest Service. And so I was with managers, I was with supervisors, I was with leadership a lot, looking at how do we do what we do better, what doesn't work, what does work. And so some ways being a consultant and being able to talk with them and work through interdepartmental conflicts really set me up to be a leader for the people I was around, because I'd seen a lot of ways things didn't work. And so I also think that in many ways, you know, one of my favorite things to do is group therapy. I love group therapy.
Mhm.
And in many ways, leading an organization is like a really big group therapy session.
It is that.
And so what it is you're just trying to figure out who all the players are, what roles they're taking on,
Mhm.
how it's working, how it's not working, and helping people kind of self-actualize and be their best selves.
Mhm.
I think the part that's a little bit challenging when you come from a therapist background is learning how to set limits and say no, because I know inside everyone is an amazing human being.
Mhm.
And how do I draw that line that says, I can't have you be my therapy project because you're an employee
Yeah.
and I can't wait for you to get better. I still have to have expectations. I have to have you do the right thing in your job. And if you can, that's great. If not, we'll put a learning plan together. And if that doesn't work, then maybe we'll have to help you get a job somewhere else. Something
But
like
it, but it really sounds like you default to the wellness of the person as opposed to the symptoms or the challenge of the person.
I do. And I think if you talk to my leadership teams over the years, they would say that that's probably my Achilles heel,
Ah,
is that I tend to give people, you know, a few too many chances sometimes.
ah,
And
okay.
if that's my Achilles heel, I think I can live with it.
Yeah,
You know,
I would say so. I mean, yeah, too much trust and too much faith in that they're going to come around, do the right thing. So how did this shift into first responders? Obviously, you grew up
sure,
with some of that, but
sure. So back when I said, you know, the stuff around John Kabat-Zinn and kind of getting into the whole wellness thing, that was kind of always there. I've always integrated it into the various treatment programs I've, you know, designed and run and helped be a part of.
Mhm.
And then what started to happen along the way was I got introduced, or it was introduced to me more and more. And the first populations I was introduced to was working with RNs and working with physicians.
Ah,
And what I found with those two groups of people was that when you treated them and put them in a group of what we call civilians, you know,
mhm.
non-healthcare providers, they somehow maintained their role as the nurse, or the doctor maintained their role as the doctor. And it
Right.
was really hard to break down the barriers and break down the walls, because all the people around them still saw them as this, you know, doctor or nurse.
Error. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what we eventually did was we created a physician only program
Ah,
and a nurse only program, although
ah,
those are a little more challenging to do. Just because of the numbers. But
oh,
what
right.
I found is that if you take a lot of very high functioning in a lot of ways,
Mhm.
very intelligent, possibly narcissistic
Doctors,
physicians,
physicians,
never
we've
special,
heard.
possibly, I say possibly,
Possibly.
you put them all in a room together, and guess what? All of a sudden, nobody's special
Yeah,
because
the
everybody,
level playing field.
right. And so I found that to be really valuable. And then all of a sudden the walls come down and they work on the things they work on, but they're also not afraid to talk about their stressors. They're not afraid to talk about the fact that they're sick and tired of this job and
Mm,
that it's killing them, and that they can't see one more dead person, or they can't have one more thing go badly.
yeah,
And they will never say that in front of normal people, you know,
civilians, right,
right,
yeah.
just like that. And so what happened along the way was we started getting, always we've had, a police officer here, a firefighter there. Believe it or not, corrections officers have a lot of
A lot of
PTS.
stress.
The way we talk about it is everyone who runs towards trauma is a first responder.
Yeah.
Anyone who runs away from trauma is probably a second responder or
Yeah,
something,
right. Or not a responder.
or non-responder.
Yeah.
Right. And so as time went by, we started noticing the same thing with firefighters and police officers, that when they were in a group of civilians, they weren't talking. They had too many things to keep inside. They had a real hard time taking the walls down. What we say is taking off their super suit. And the next thing you know, they leave treatment saying, I didn't really get anything out of that. And so the idea was, okay, how can we craft and create programs that are specific to that population? And it was just a real easy transition from what we've been doing from physicians to what we would do with first responders.
And I'm sure it took you a lot of observation to realize what you needed to do to compose that homogenous group so that that they understood each other and nobody was special. But it's such a great example of one of those sort of elegantly simple solutions. Oh, we figured this out. But I'm sure
but actually we got a lot of pushback too.
Oh, did you? Interesting.
Yeah, because there are groups of professionals out there who say, well, aren't you just perpetuating their uniqueness? Aren't you just keeping them all alone? It's like, there's something about what they do and how they do it that is special enough that it needs to be done that way.
Yeah.
So for example, with physician groups, a lot of times when they come out of treatment, they don't want to do 12-step programs because they don't want to walk in there and have someone recognize the doctor.
Right.
And so what they wind up doing is they're kind of specialty, almost underground meetings for physicians. And the same thing is true with first responders, because once they own who they are, life tends to get a lot easier as opposed to kind of keeping it safe and secret. At the same time, I understand why some people don't do that thing. And the same is true for first responders. I think the other thing that really informed me in a lot of ways is, I mentioned my father's background. Our family is kind of divided into half. We have half of our family are physicians, psychologists, healthcare workers, and educators. And then the other half is military. And so I have a cousin who's a brigadier general. His father was a 3-star general and the head of the director of the NSA for a long time. I have a stepbrother who was a DEA officer. And so just kind of understanding that world from inside the family and how it was really difficult for them to connect sometimes, and how when they were back, they weren't really back.
Right.
And what that really led me towards realizing is that in addition to treating first responders, which we do in our program at Simple Recovery, I felt like, the real lost group here are the first responder families.
Yeah.
And so that's really where a lot of my passion is taking off right now. In fact, I just actually finished a 4-day retreat yesterday where we had 12 first responder spouses from Friday to Monday. And we took them through a process of how do you reconcile all the emotions that go into being a first responder wife or spouse, because you're really proud of them. It's a culture that you embrace in a lot of ways.
Right.
But what starts to happen over time is they're gone a lot. You don't know when they're going to leave. It's a lot kind of like being on deployment. We don't, all of us are so grateful and we thank firefighters, but no one really thanks the wives.
Yeah.
And yet those guys have been out on duty for a month at a time. And what's been happening at home the whole time they're home?
I remember as a kid, being a Navy kid, I had a friend whose dad was a submariner, and he'd be gone for a long period of time. And it was almost, and that was hard, but him coming back was hard too, because it threw off their rhythms. It threw off what their mom's job was. And they were sort of, I won't say happier when he was out at sea, but definitely wasn't easy.
Well, I think you're onto something. You mentioned the fact that they have their routines.
Yeah.
And if we have to function, we function. And then what happens when our hero comes back home?
Yeah.
And, we see it played out several ways. One is it feels a little intrusive, like we've got this, but they want to come home and be the dad and the husband. And sometimes the family wants them to be involved.
Right.
They have a real hard time reintegrating because, they've been gone for, let's say, 96 hours, so
Yeah.
4 days, and they come home and they actually need to putter. They can't just jump in.
Yeah.
And yet, the spouse has been waiting for them, and they want to have conversations, and they want to go do things. And the last thing this first responder wants to do is go out to dinner in public
And socialize. Yeah.
and socialize or do anything like that. And so you add that up over the course of 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and you've got a lot of distance created. Plus the fact that, oftentimes the spouse, a first responder spouse doesn't say, "How was your day at work today? How was your day at work, honey?" Because either they tell you and you never want to hear it again, or they don't tell you and you feel like, well, you're keeping things from me, or we're emotionally cut off.
So there's no win in that either way.
There is no win. Yeah. And, it's kind of interesting because as a healthcare provider, I've experienced that too in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I have to be really careful what I share at home, because I don't think about it, because I think it's really powerful stuff. But when someone reveals their childhood sexual abuse, and I happen to mention that to my wife, it takes her to a place she never wants to go. And so I had to learn, that there's just certain things I don't talk about. And yet, where do I go? Who do I talk with about that? And so another interesting thing that's happened in first responder world is we've begun to come to terms with the fact that first responders have post-traumatic stress.
Right.
And we finally can say it's okay, that it's a normal part. It's a presumptive part of your job.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do your job and not have it, period.
Yep.
And what we used to say was, if you can't handle your business, you're going to get everyone exposed to repeated traumas. It changes your brain. And so when we get into things like meditation and this warrior meditation you mentioned earlier, that's a way of retraining your brain to calm down, get quiet, kind of rework the synapses in a lot of ways so that you can be centered and okay and present and all those kinds of things, which is really tough, because what happens in a first responder is the more trauma you get, the more hypervigilant you become and the more suspicious you become. And in many ways, we train to be that way in the first place.
Which is healthy.
Yeah. But it can be too much.
Yeah.
And so in many ways, that's a major impediment to first responders being willing to accept help, because they wonder what you're after. Like, you're trying to get rid of me. You don't really care about all those kinds of things. And so there's a lot of cultural changes we have to do. So even though we say it's good, we really continue to build their system out so that they feel safe in asking for help. Because what we find when we go in and talk with lots of departments around California, and we've spread beyond to the Western United States, is everyone says, yes, we want our men and women to get help. And so we say, okay, so what happens when they ask? And they're like, we're not sure. There's 5 or 6 questions that you have to have the answer to. You got to have, they want to know, how long am I going to be gone? How am I going to get paid? What's going to happen to my family? Will anybody know? Will I lose my chance for promotion? All those kinds of things. It's just kind of a terrifying system to walk into. Take that back over to my life as an EAP person working in corporate America. And we figured that stuff out a long, long time ago. We know how to keep things safe and quiet. And so what we've been able to do is start to help you. We want them to get help, but they're willing to get help. And they feel like everyone's not going to out them about it, because a lot of this stuff is really private. They don't want to talk about the PTS. They don't want to talk about an addiction. They don't want to talk about all kinds of things that they've been doing. And they want to come back to work. And so we're at the beginning of figuring all that out and getting them well again. And I also believe, like I said earlier, the whole concept of helping the families is going to go a really long way to help the first responders.
So for folks in the corporate world, they feel like first responders, I'm sure, at times, because they're they putting out fires.
It's nonstop. I have to tell you that everything about technology is worked against us as humans.
I deal with change management issues all the time, and it's not about the technology.
And it's overwhelming, and you don't know how to pivot. And the next thing you know, you're completely stressed out, and all you want to do is check out, and all you want to do is self-medicate with something.
So what of the work that you've done, and I know you've covered all those bases as well, what do you think is important for the non-first responder, literally first responders, those of us in the corporate or in the business world?
I think wellness is wellness. And we need to look at that wellness wheel and what are the categories that we're paying attention to and not paying attention to. I think kind of the double-edged sword of the wellness movement in the corporate world is there's so many companies now who have a wellness program.
Mm-hmm.
But what does it really mean? And what does it really look like? And usually it's activities.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's, okay, we have a gym, we give you yoga, you can do some meditation, we have a quiet room, we've got a really cool coffee bar, all those kinds of things. But what really needs to happen is we have to have a culture of wellness. And a culture of wellness basically says, you know what, it's okay to take a moment along the day, throughout the day, to center yourself, to do what you need to do to be present. And if you can do that, then you'll do your job better. You'll be more
Interesting.
productive. And so what that really means is that, well, while all the quote unquote rank and file wants to go do wellness stuff, until management and leadership buys in, nothing's going to change.
And
I can't tell you how many places. Go ahead.
Can it be that simple that I mean, I remember my studio days in entertainment, I'm managing media for an entertainment company, is a deadlines all day long and people screaming at you. I used to take what I called the sanity walk. I'd take a 10-minute walk in the back lot of the studio, and that was my joking, I'm taking a sanity walk, but it really was.
I think entertainment is one of the last frontiers.
Oh.
for learning how to manage stress.
Right.
And I have a few ideas, and they're kind of in the works. So we're not going to talk about them a whole lot right now. But I got a plan.
Well, tell us about something, a skill or a practice that anybody could use that just needs that bit of resilience or ability to manage that stress, or at least tamp it down for a while.
Sure. So I think, if we want to get a little biological for just a second, this is really all about cortisol.
Yeah.
Cortisol is the stress hormone, and all kinds of things throughout the day release cortisol. Mostly it's the way we interpret what happens, because, one man's bored is another man's relaxed.
Yeah.
And so one of the things we need to do is recognize the things that make us feel stress. And then we have to think about, okay, how am I going to burn off the cortisol? Because that's really what you have to do. And one of them is the 10-minute sanity walk. Yeah. Although I would expand it to 20 if you could.
That's good. I do that now, but yeah.
Exercise is a really good thing. There's certain kinds of foods that are really good. Green tea, bananas, strange little things that you don't even know about.
That's good.
Taking a moment along the way to kind of really look at your big picture. What's the big picture?
Yeah.
Am I going to die over this? And sometimes it feels like you are, but can you take a moment and get quiet and get centered? There are so many mindfulness apps out there now. And I think they're all good one way or another. And some of us like to do things that are very quiet and silent. Some of us like to do things that are loud and noisy. Some of us like to be guided. Some of us like to do, a big aerobics class. Some of us like to be in the mountains all by ourselves. And so I think we need to realize that whatever you do that's mindful doesn't necessarily mean you're putting on your yoga pants,
right?
Or you're putting on your meditation clothes. It's, how do I get quiet for just a few minutes?
Yeah.
Exercise is great, but I still think it should be balanced, because they lose their mind if they don't get to work out. And that's maybe a whole nother thing. That could be some kind of addiction almost.
Yeah, right.
And so how do I do that kind of thing? One of the things that's really fascinating is when it comes to first responders, there's an amazing man who works with us. His name is Matty Fiorenza, and he's a Anaheim firefighter, and he went through it, and he came back from the edge. One of the things that we know about first responders in the last 2 to 3 years is that there have been more police and fire suicides than line of duty deaths. In other words, more people are killing themselves than actually dying on the job. And so something's really wrong there. Yeah. And so we're really working on that. And he's part of a really cool organization that works with veterans and first responders who have been suicidal. It takes them through a real intense process. And they develop something that they call warrior meditation. In many ways, it's just a great name because it sounds cool and sounds tough. But in many ways, what it really is so you may have heard of what's called EMDR. EMDR is eye movement desensitization retraining. And it's really a trauma-based, it's for healing trauma. And what the meditation does is it has you go through these phases in about 18 minutes of really focusing on some things that allow you to get into that quiet space, because
Mhm.
most of us we would love to meditate if our minds could get quiet.
Right.
And yet really meditation is about making your mind quiet.
Right.
It's the other way around, but we think, well, I can't ever do that because if I get quiet, then my mind's just going to go 1,000 miles an hour. And so there are some tricks and tips in this warrior meditation that people can do to help get real focused so that you forget that you don't have to think. And the next
Right.
thing you know, you're quiet and you feel really good. So that's, you kind of do what feeds
Works
you.
for you.
Yeah, and you might have to try a few different kinds. I did transcendental meditation for
Too.
about 1.5 years, 2 years, and I tried something else which felt like I was being disloyal to the
You were
TM guys.
cheating on
I
TM?
was cheating on TM, but the next thing you know, all the other ways I've done it have like hit me so hard and well that I love doing guided meditation. I love doing my own meditation. I love doing walking meditation.
Yeah.
So I do all those kinds of things.
My academic background is theater. And so I was trained in guided visualization, meditation,
Right.
relaxation techniques. I mean, as soon as anybody says anything like, well, let's breathe, I'm like, I'm out. And it's really nice to have that ability to just relax at a moment's notice. I mean, it's
the tricks have, which are, if my heart's going fast, how do I slow my heart? You know, if my blood pressure's up, how do I lower my blood pressure?
right.
You know, if I have really shallow breathing, how do I, or I'm not breathing,
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times in a day I tell someone, stop, breathe, just breathe.
Right.
Because we forget.
Which has become a cliche, but it's physiologically very valid, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm not talking about the meme. I'm talking about the real process.
The real thing.
Of
Right.
not breathing.
Right.
Right. And so, you know, all this stuff I'm doing feels like it's just been a natural progression of moving towards wellness. And I think, you know, again, in a lot of ways, we have to be careful because a lot of things in wellness seem like they're all very Eastern. And so sometimes I run into kind of resistance because people in the Western world often already feel like they have a religion or a faith. And if you're going to make me do this kind of stuff, doesn't that mean I'm going to be a Buddhist or a Hindu?
Right.
It's like, well, we're talking about ancient practices for getting quiet,
Right.
you know, and learning to be with yourself. And meditation is prayer, you know, however
And
you look at it.
Most people don't know yoga was evolved as an exercise prior to meditation. I mean, it was, you're working it all out so you can become quiet.
Right.
Now we think of it as that is the way you become quiet, but in fact, it's more of a body quieting so your mind can quiet, but it's interesting.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So I've got one last question for you, and Dr. Odom's going to share something really special for listeners, but I want to ask you the radical idea question. And I know you've thought about this because you said you had one and you're doing it, but if you could change the world, a corner of it, the whole thing, what is your radical idea for transformation?
Whether it's corporate America or first responder world, healthcare, wherever you talk about it, we need cultural change. And part of the problem with cultural change is that a lot of us have been around a long time and we're really used to what we do the way we do it. And so before we can learn anything, we actually have to unlearn other things. And so who's the best group of people to teach? If you can think of anybody, any group of humans, who are the best ones to teach, who are going to learn it the fastest?
Children.
Exactly right. And so the whole idea is we're going to take wellness, and it's been tried in multiple places, but we're going to bring a whole new way of doing wellness and infuse it into the school systems.
Oh, you gave me chills.
Right. And we're going to do it in a way that meets all those academic criteria, Common Core.
Yeah, right.
All those kinds of things that are what we have to live in and die by and get funded by.
Yeah.
Even if you're taking 1 minute, whatever it is. So I think if we can start to teach the kindergartners how to do this, then they're first graders, and the next thing you know, they're 12th graders, and they're not about to hurt themselves or someone else anymore. Yeah. Because the second highest group of suicides are kids ages about 10 to 16.
I know, it's frightening.
So I feel like that's something we really need to focus on. And if we can do that and put that into the classroom, I think we can really change who we are.
Wow.
I think anything else is about, you know, fixing older broken people who deserve to be fixed,
right?
Worked with too. But it's a lot easier if you're just learning it than you're having to say, that's not the way we used to do it.
Right.
So that's my dream, and that's kind of the direction that we're headed. Because that actually came out of first responder stuff, because my friend I told you about, Matty Fiorenza, he's been asked and hired by multiple police academies. So he's teaching this warrior meditation and other things to the young ones.
Yeah.
So that from the beginning of their career in public safety, it's like, no, this is how you take care of yourself.
Right.
And then it doesn't ever have to get that bad.
Yeah. Right.
So kind of taking it from that and bringing it down to the little ones.
Ah, that's so great. I love it. In my book, The Hope-Driven Leader, I wrote about a woman who goes in and teaches yoga to elementary school kids and sort of inner city schools where they deal with things like gunshot fires at night. People, all of those kinds of.
Yeah, and people have been doing that in, kind of an enlightened school district here, an enlightened school district
here and there.
Right. Private schools have been doing it.
Yeah.
But we're looking at doing it in a way that just kind of takes it across the board, and that there's no real argument, because it really fits into the curricula, and there's really no way to say no.
You just weave it right in. Yeah, that's amazing. I would be so thrilled if that's in every school, in every kindergarten, in every Head Start all over the country. That would be amazing. So, and then you take on the rest of the world, right, in your spare time.
Yeah, just like that.
Yeah.
And I still manage to meditate twice a day, and I go trail running, and I have dinner with my family almost every night.
I find walking very meditative. For me, that's when the ideas flow, and it's just that sense of peacefulness, especially in nature, but just around my neighborhood is fine too.
It is totally fine.
So now, Dr. Odom, you have offered something very generous and really special. And can you tell us a little bit about that? Sure.
So along the way, I kind of accidentally, on purpose, started a retreat company that does wellness retreats. We have locations in Costa Rica, and we have a location in Eastern San Diego County, a really neat place in Warner Springs. I'd be happy to offer a 10% discount to anybody who wants to sign up for any of our wellness retreats. We do them two different ways. We basically say, come to our retreat or bring your retreat to us.
Oh, nice.
So for example, Costa Rica, a really interesting thing happened this last year. A lady called me from Spain. She said, I'm an equine therapist, and I'd like to do an equine therapy retreat at your location. I said, I don't have a ranch, and I don't have horses.
A horse?
Costa Rica.
Right.
She said, no, that's not it. She goes, you don't know this, but 5 kilometers from you is a horse rescue ranch. Oh. And so we're going to come stay at your place, build a retreat around it, and go work with the rescue horses.
Oh, that's amazing.
Fantastic. So they came and did a 10-day retreat.
Wow.
So anybody with a good retreat idea, we can do the logistics for it and help it all set up, or we have our own that come periodically. And then the one out in Boulder at Boulder Oaks Ranch tends to be a little bit more focused on a theme. So we do corporate retreats. I've done, like I said, the first responder spouse retreat. People who want to get real intense about what they're doing, because it's an amazing place out there. Mm. So I'd love to, anybody who wants to try to do that, and just go to our website, which is shiftwellness.com.
And that's SHIFT, shiftwellness.com. And can they learn more about you there and see what you're up to?
They can learn about corporate wellness, first responder wellness, just kind of all the things that we're doing. We'd love to talk to anybody about what they need and how we could help walk with them a little while and help them get where they want to go.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. I'm gonna call my stationary bike. Now it's going to be warrior biking that I'm going to do on
Perfect.
My bike.
Exactly
warrior
right.
Biking.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Stephen Odom, for being with us today and sharing so much. And I really appreciate it. And join us next time.
All right. Thanks, Libby.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Radical CEO. We invite you to view the episode blog post at our website, libbygill.com/podcast, to get links and access additional resources. Join us again next time for another episode of The Radical CEO.